It's time to start learning the bones. And there you can see a person on the left has a lot of bones. Person on the right does as well, you just can't see them. Label me like one of your French girls. That's what you're going to have to do on your lab exercises. You're going to have to label bones. This is a Titanic reference. You're probably too young to have seen that movie. Okay, so the human skeleton. Human skeleton consists of 206 regular named bones. Now you have more than 206 bones in your body, but we don't give names, exact names, to some of them. I'll explain later. There are 206 bones that you have to know the name of. Fortunately, they're paired in many cases, and so it really is not 206 unique bones. You have right and left. That takes care of a lot of that. The axial skeleton is the skeleton that follows the body's axis. The root word there is like axle, like that holds the wheels on a car. Axial means pole. So this is the pole in the middle of your body. That's your body's pole. It's your axial skeleton. It's what keeps you standing upright and keeps you stable. It consists of 80 bones altogether. The skull, the hyoid, the auditory ossicles, the sternum, the ribs, and the vertebral column. Some people say vertebral. I never care about pronunciation, just spell it right. I work with people from all over the world in laboratories, and believe me, people from other places pronounce things differently. That's never an issue, just spell it correctly. The appendicular skeleton, the root word there, appendix. Appendix means something that hangs on. So the appendicular skeleton hangs on to the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton is the pole in the middle, and the appendicular skeleton hangs on to that pole. It's 126 bones altogether. Notice that 126 plus 80 makes 206. So far the arithmetic is working out very well. These consist of the upper and lower limbs, the pectoral girdle, and the pelvic girdle. Now let's look at those terms and make sure we know what's going on. Upper and lower limbs, we're talking about your arms and your legs. 2 arms, 2 legs. The pectoral girdle is what holds your arms onto your axial skeleton. So in other words, the arm has to be attached in order to connect to your axial skeleton. So think about it. What are the 2 bones? Just the common names, even if you don't know the technical names. What are the 2 bones that hold your arm onto the rest of your body? Yeah, your shoulder blade and your collarbone. Your collarbone we call the clavicle. Your shoulder blade we call the scapula. And then your pelvic girdle, what does that mean? Pectoral girdle, by the way, refers to, pectoral means chest. You have the pectoral chest muscles. Pelvic girdle, so this is where your legs attach to your pelvis. Now, there's a bone there called os coxa. Os means bone, coxa means hip, so literally your hip bone. It's composed of 3 other bones that fuse together during development, but we're just going to refer to it as os coxa, the hip bone. Let's talk about markings on bones. There are 3 kinds of bone surface markings. Depressions and openings constitute one. So depressions and openings are like the dents and the holes. They're the innies, okay? And then there are also processes. Processes are the bumps. They're the outies. So on lab, when you're being tested, when you have a mock practical or an actual lab practical, I will point at one of these things and I'll say, name the depression, or name the opening, or name the process. So basically everything on a bone is one of those 3. Process means anything that sticks out. Hole is, opening is a hole. Depression is just kind of a shallow, scooped out area. So depressions and openings, what are they for? Well, one thing they do is they form joints. Okay, that's where bones come together. Another thing they do is allow passage of soft tissues like nerves and blood vessels. So a lot of times bone is living tissue. It needs oxygen and glucose to stay alive. So there have to be holes for blood vessels to get in and out. Also holes for nerves to get in and out. So that's what the depressions and openings are for. The processes, those are the projections or the outgrowths on the bone. Those also form joints in many cases. So in other words, the process of one bone fits together into the depression of another bone, and that will form a joint. In addition to that, though, a lot of the processes are points of attachment for muscles and connective tissue like ligaments and tendons. Bones don't move themselves. In order to move a bone, a muscle has to move it. And in order for a muscle to move a bone, it has to be attached to a bone. So the processes in many cases are places where the muscles attach. So if you look in the picture, that's your temporal bone, all right? And look at some of the parts of the temporal bone. Notice there's the zygomatic process. That's going to connect to another bone. That's going to form a joint of sorts. The external acoustic meatus, that's your ear hole. That's how you hear. The mastoid process, that's that big knob behind your ear. That's where muscles attach. Styloid process, once again, that's where muscles attach. So see, we're already seeing what's going on. The mandibular fossa, that's the depression where your mandible fits in. Your mandible is your lower jaw. So see, on that bone, those are depressions and openings and processes, all right? And that's where you either form joints or where muscles or ligaments or tendons attach. Continuing with bone surface markings, the depressions and the openings, let's look at some examples. So foramen, or foramen, I don't care how you pronounce it again. Literally in Latin, that means hole. In Latin, a lot of words don't form their plural just by adding an S. So the plural of foramen is foramina. So if you have one, it's a foramen. If you have two or three or four, however many, we call them foramina. Those are openings. Those are holes. A canal, root word means pipe, is a tube-like passage. So some bones have canals. A fossa, from the root word meaning a trench, plural is fossae or fossae, is a shallow depression. A sulcus, that means a groove, plural is sulci, a groove or a furrow. So what I'm trying to do here is showing you the terms that you're going to be seeing over and over again. If you learn what they mean, then it'll make it a lot easier when you see them. So a lot of bones will have a foramen, a lot of bones will have a fossa, and so on. So if you know what those words mean, then you already know what it is you're looking at or where you might find it. So a meatus, a tube-like passage. And then processes, a condyle means knuckle, so that's a large round protuberance. An epicondyle, epi, whenever you see epi, get used to this prefix. It means above or on top of. So an epicondyle is the projection above the condyle. A facet, root word means face, so it's a smooth, flat surface. Articular means forming a joint. A lot of facets form joints. A crest, a prominent ridge. A spinous process, a sharp, slender projection. A trochanter, a very large projection. A tubercle, small, rounded projection. A tuberosity, a large, rounded, rough projection. In other words, just get used to these terms because they'll show up again and again and again. So look there on the right, on the upper half, there is the humerus. That's your upper arm bone. Notice it has tubercles on it. It has an intertubercular sulcus. In other words, that's the groove between the tubercles. See, the words really tell you what they mean, and so knowing the parts of the words makes it a lot easier. The supracondylar ridge, the ridge above the knuckle. All right, see, so the medial epicondyle, that's the process above the condyle. Then look down below at the mandible. Once again, you see a mandibular condyle, a knuckle-like process. And some of the others, there's the mandibular foramen, the mental foramen. Those are holes where nerves and blood vessels get in and out of the bone. So the more you get used to these words, the easier your life gets. Here you see a bunch of examples here. We see a spine on the scapula. We see the fossae or fossae. Those are the depressions above and below the spine. Guess what you might call the depression above the spine? How about the supraspinous fossa? What about the depression below the spine? The subspinous or the infraspinous fossa. So there you see. Again, just a foramen on the skull, a crest, sinuses or openings. So a meatus, that's the hole where you hear. Look on the femur there, that's your upper leg bone. You can see the trochanters. So again, tuberosities, fossae, epicondyles, condyles. See, these words show up again and again and again. So get used to them. Let's start talking about the skull. Skull, how many bones do you think the skull is? Do you know? Well, there are 8 cranial bones in the skull. The cranial bones are the ones that we often call the brain case. That actually, those 8 bones hold your brain. They also house the ear ossicles. Ear ossicles are little tiny bones that you hear with. The malleus, the incus, and the stapes. You can see them in the lower right. Malleus, root word like mallet, means like a hammer. Incus, root word, means the anvil. Like the old blacksmiths would pound the horseshoe, they would use the hammer. They would put the horseshoe on top of the anvil and then pound it with the hammer. So the malleus pounds on the incus. And then that causes the stapes to wiggle. Stapes in Latin means the stirrup. So look there in the lower right. Doesn't that bone labeled number 1 look like a stirrup? Look at bone number 3. You see how it has a big thick head like a hammer, like a mallet? So see, once again, the names actually help. They try to direct you to what they are. The 8 cranial bones provide attachments for muscles of the jaw, the neck, and the face. The malleus connects to the tympanic membrane. The stapes connects to the cochlea. We'll learn about those coming up later, but that's how we hear. It's by the vibration of the tympanic membrane, which informally we call the eardrum. When that vibrates, it ultimately causes the malleus to bang on the incus. That wiggles the stapes, and then that causes a wave of fluid to pass through the cochlea. Cochlea, Greek, the root word means the snail. See in the lower right? See, there's a thing that looks like the snail? That's the cochlea. That's where hearing actually takes place. Then there are 14 facial bones. So these are to protect the delicate organs of vision, smell, and taste. So your eyes are delicate organs. So look in the left-hand view there on the top. See, we have those big depressions where your eyes are. You call them the eye sockets. We call them the orbits. Yeah, your eyes are delicate, so we enclose them in bone. And your sense of smell and taste, your tongue, your olfactory epithelium up at the top of your nostrils, if those were exposed directly to the outside world, they could be damaged, so the bones protect them. They also allow food to get in and air to get in. So, how many bones are there in the skull? I know you can do this. We've all made it past the 4th grade. 8 cranial bones, 14 facial bones, 22 bones. Your skull consists of 22 bones. Let's look at the 8 cranial bones. We have the occipital bone, 2 parietal bones, the frontal bone, 2 temporal bones, the ethmoid bone, and the sphenoid bone. I expect you to know the names of the 8 cranial bones. I might say on an exam, name 3 cranial bones. You should be able to do that. And a way to remember, old people from Transylvania eat spiders, okay? Yeah, it's stupid, but sometimes little stupid things help your memory remember. So see, O is for occipital, P for parietal, F for frontal, and so on, okay? And Transylvania, maybe you don't know where that is, that's where this guy comes from. Count Dracula from Transylvania. Then the 14 facial bones. So the vomer, so look in the nose hole there. See there's a bone at the bottom, yellow? That's the vomer. Then there are the conchae. Really their name is the inferior nasal conchae. So again, look in the nose hole. See the little pink bones that hang down there at the bottom? Those are the inferior nasal conchae. The nasal bones are up at the bridge of your nose. The maxilla are your upper jaw. There's 2 of those, one on each side. The mandible is your lower jaw. The palatine bones are at your palate, your hard palate on the roof of your mouth. They're way at the back. The zygomatic bone, sometimes called your cheekbone, and the lacrimal bones, notice those, you can see them, they're colored on the picture here, they're green. No, they're not. They're actually sort of reddish. They're in between. So the nasal bone, notice the nasal bone is kind of, what would you call that? Is that sort of a magenta? I don't know. My wife and I watch Project Runway. I've learned lots of new color names like puce and mauve and periwinkle and fuchsia. So I don't know. I keep trying to improve my color names. But the lacrimal bone, that's kind of like around the corner of, that's like where you get the little eye boogers. It's right in there. Lacrima, tears, that's where the tear ducts are. That's where the tears flow. In order to help remember this, you can remember the Virgil cannot make my pet zebra laugh. See, Virgil for vomer, C for conchae. I know it looks like conchae, but usually the CH is pronounced as a K. I don't care. Not for nasal, make for maxilla, and so on, okay? So, bite me, Virgil. All right. Then the sutures. So the bones of the skull grow together after you're born. They're not fused at birth because you've got to get something pretty big through a little tiny small hole, and so the bones can actually slide over one another in order to get through. That's why we have sutures. As you grow, then the bones fuse together and they leave these big prominent seams called sutures. So there are four main cranial sutures, and to remember, you can remember that the cranial sutures have class, C-L-S-S. The sutures are the coronal, the lambdoid, the squamous, and the sagittal. So looking on the left-hand view, you can see there the lambdoid suture. It's where the occipital bone comes together with the two parietal bones. Then you can see on the view on the right the coronal suture. That's where the parietal bone comes together with the frontal bone. You can also see the squamous suture there. That's where the temporal bone connects to the other bones. And the sagittal suture we can sort of see on the left there on the top. Sagittal suture splits your head into left and right sides. So once again here, cranial sutures, you can see there close up the sagittal and the lambdoid. And notice, see those little bones called sutural bones? Those are bones that actually kind of formed when the larger bones fused together. So when the parietal bones and the occipital bone grew together, kind of like little tiny islands of bones got trapped. Remember I said we had 206 named bones? Yeah, so the parietal and the occipital count as part of those 206. The sutural bones don't. Everybody's got some sutural bones. Different people have different numbers of them. We don't give them individual names. We just refer to them all as sutural bones, okay? So the lambdoid suture unites the parietal and the occipital bones. The sagittal suture unites the two parietal bones. And then here we see the coronal suture unites frontal and parietal. And the squamous suture unites the parietal and the temporal. So that's it for the basic bones and sutures of the skull. Next, in the next PowerPoint, we're going to start looking at the individual bones and their features. We're going to look at the openings, the depressions, and the processes.